Hi, I'm Brenda Burnette with the Florida Citrus Hall of Fame, and today we have John Veldhuis with us. And John, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to come over here during the Citrus Expo.
Thank you.
So you had stopped by and we started talking first about this, and
Yeah.
you had told me about these barrels.
Yes, sir.
And tell us a little bit about that now.
The best I can remember, some of the old timers were telling me about they harvested their fruit, took it out on a little dock and laid it in the sun, turned it over every day or so that the skin got conditioned, and they had accumulated some moss which they dried out, and they put moss and fruit in layers in the barrels and put a head on the barrel. The barrel was recycled, i.e. it was used for something else in the past, whether it was crackers or pickles or something, but then to put a head in there, and then they put a stencil with a black little dabbing paintbrush and stuff, so that they stenciled their name on it, the people who were responsible for growing it, so.
And you said that they would be along Lake Harris?
Yes, Lake Harris in Lake County. You can still see the old dock, the posts where some of the old docks are. Really good fishing around those old posts. And but they had small docks out there, and the steamboats would come by. They were flat bottom things. The reason why I know that, there were two of them that were disclosed when a dam went out and drained part of Lake Harris and all of Lake Griffin. And these two, one of them was about 35 foot long, and the other one was about 60 foot long. And you could see where an old little steam engine had been a flat bottom. And they loaded the stuff on and took it up the Ocklawaha and on up to Jacksonville through the St. John's for shipment up north on a sailing ship.
Right. Okay, that's pretty neat.
I'm not that old though.
I know you're not. And then we've got the oxen that would pull the carts.
Yes.
And that was basically from the field.
Yes.
Or to market.
No, they pull those from the field out to the side of the lake or something to, well, of course, a set of oxen. My family homesteaded in Montana, but they were good for a lot of things, just a lot of things. They could do everything that a horse could do and more.
What about mules? I know I've seen them with mules before too. Which one was better?
Well, I don't know. Mules were some of them were kind of cantankerous, some of them were kind of friendly, some of them were But I think a team of horses was a preferred thing. But oxen were used to.
Yeah. So do you know? Tell us a little bit about your history in the citrus industry and your family.
Okay, I was born in '42, and we arrived here in Winter Haven in 1945, and my dad was put in charge of a laboratory that was a great research laboratory that was defunct. Opened it up, and through his work and some others at that place, Florida citrus concentrate was perfected. They started with carnations evaporating technology, carnation milk, and went from that. And the thing that made it work was taking fresh squeezed juice, mix it with the concentrate to bring it up to 42-degree bricks, and then send that to the housewife. I'm shortcutting a lot, but anyway.
It's pretty much the gist of it, though.
Yeah, that all started, the first evaporators and what have you that went into producing concentrate was in the late 40s. And it took a hold real quick, and that gave a whole lot of incentive for people to plant a whole lot more citrus in the state of Florida.
Well, at that time, citrus was mainly sold on the fresh market. And then when citrus concentrate came through, that's kind of changed the industry.
Yeah, but fresh market, but a lot of it was sold canned. And during the Second World War, all that we could can went to the war effort. It did taste a bit different, a lot different than what we canned, heat-treated citrus juices, orange juice and grapefruit juice, and they mixed pineapples and orange juice to make it taste sweeter and this and that. But it all went to the troops in Europe, but it was a little bit of home. They were accustomed to that. And then our taste changed when concentrate came along, and our taste changed again when single strength came along.
Right.
So.
So speaking of the war effort, I know you grew up in Winter Haven.
Yes.
And they used to have the old the prisoner camps there for the German POWs, right?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the POW camps were run by the military base at Camp Blanding.
Okay.
And if you wanted fruit pickers, you asked for fruit pickers, and they would send you so many people down to fruit, but you had to teach them how to pick fruit.
These were the prisoners of war that would pick the fruit?
Yes, yeah. Or they worked in the plants, and if you wanted people to work in your juice plant, either, again, the tin or what they call brights, the tin cans, they would do that to replace some of our men that were overseas. But it was controlled by Camp Blanding, so that they had absolute control of their housing, But it was only about 3 blocks away from where we lived, and my grandfather, we're Dutch, could speak German. My father got a PhD in chemistry. He had a writing knowledge of German because all scientific journals were written in German in those days.
Oh, okay.
And so I many times went with my grandpa to the prison camp. I was just a little kid, and I carried this little bag along with me. But the guards would not let me inside. I had to stay outside of the gate. So when he went in, he would doctor on whoever needed help or whoever had problems, a broken leg, broken arm, were fixed and so forth. But they had medical treatment. It was a little different what we might expect today, but that's the way it was in those days. But anyway.
Okay, so back to the barracks. Let's talk. So the barracks for the POW were right there where Norma Mayo Hall is, or what?
Yeah, there were. I don't know if Norma Mayo Hall was there at the time. Probably was, but it was in between Winter Haven downtown and Lake Silver, and there were 4 concrete long barracks buildings that the prisoners stayed in, and a lot of the town people became familiar with some of the people, and especially those people of German ancestry. But it was just open barracks with, the best I can remember, with bunks in it.
Okay.
I only saw it after the prisoners were out, but they'd come and go as needed in Winter Haven. And that became the fairgrounds, and there was a gate built that at the beginning of the fairgrounds. This was up about 2 blocks north of, 2 blocks south of where the current Winter Haven Police Department is today. All that land is, there's still some open land down there near the Silver Lake. Anyway.
They've done a nice job with that now.
Yes.
So we had talked about brights real quickly. So tell me about this.
Brights were cans. They put orange juice and grapefruit juice or blends in tin cans like this one. And if you look inside, they were zinc coated. They were plated to keep the acid from eating through. So there was even a tolerance for a little zinc in the juice, which is not harmful. In fact, it's something our body uses.
Beneficial, yes.
Yeah. So it did add a little bit of a flavor to it that people would miss when they had it in the shellac-covered cans. And but Mr. Griffin would tell you all kinds of stories. He's gone now. But anyway, so if they had a juice plant had an order, the Crusoe family had an order. This was their brand, and if they had an order for citrus, they'd bring the brights out and run it through a labeling system and label it and ship it, put it in a carton and ship it. But the next label might have been somebody else. It's real hard to keep it separate in a juice plant, except by the cans, the brights, and you got paid for all that. But it's kind of interesting, and the zinc plating is something. It's still in some cans.
Is it?
Yes. Yeah. It's a better protection than is the shellac we use today and other things. Anyway,
right.
Yeah. Jim Griffiths was the guy. You remember Jim?
I do remember Jim.
Oh, Jim was into grapefruit. There were all kinds of problems with grapefruit juice in cans and this and that. He fought for the grapefruit industry hard for all the bad flavors and all the good flavors, and we even talked about zinc. But he was a neat old guy.
What did he say about the zinc?
Well, he was in favor of it too because it was something that actually enhanced the flavor.
Okay. Okay.
That sounds good, doesn't it?
It does. But well, Jim's in the Hall of Fame.
Yes.
And I remember when we did his presentation, something that surprised me, that he was a ballroom dancer.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, I didn't know that. He was a thorn in a lot of people's side.
He was very cantankerous sometimes.
We needed that.
You needed that. Well, it's like Nancy Hardy. She was a thorn too, but loved her. She was like a second mother to me.
Yeah, she grew up about a block away from me.
Did she?
Yes.
Oh, I loved her.
So
she was in it at a time when women really weren't around doing a lot at that point.
Yeah, there were only about 4,000 people when I was a little boy in all of Winter Haven, you know. So my grandfather was a doctor who had retired and come back. And my dad had a PhD in chemistry, so I was known as Little Doc.
Okay.
And no matter where I was, everybody could remember where I was that day. And if I did something wrong, there was a telephone call to home.
Little Doc's up here doing something he's not supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember the guy at the H&H pharmacy said he would charge my grandpa a nickel for a coat. And when my grandpa found out about it, ooh, did I ever get in trouble? He owed him a nickel.
Oh,
anyway,
my.
Anyway.
So Winter Haven had a lot of citrus personalities there. Tell us about a few of them. Like,
oh yeah. There was the Snively family, and there was not Herlong, but anyway, there was you caught me off balance.
Oh,
there were a
sorry.
number of citrus moguls that lived in and around Winter Haven. It was that there was not much else to do there. After you got out of high school, I was told that you had two choices: go to work in the citrus business or join the Army.
Oh, wow.
There wasn't much else there, you know. So it was a farming community. You know, there was nothing. You know, everything was. I can remember at church that the biggest donors were always the moguls from citrus, and they got their way. They controlled the churches.
Well, I remember the Snively family, and some of them I went to school with. Pate was on my board for a while. Pate was on the board for Florida Citrus Showcase.
School together.
Did you?
Yes. Ginger, his wife was in the same class with me in high school.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, well, tell us a little bit about the Snively's, because I remember Pate's dad was John?
John.
Okay,
and his brother, so it was Johnny
and John Jr.
Second when he was a junior.
Yeah.
And then the one before that, they called him Papa John. That was the first, I think. That was John, and then John the Third it was. I think I've got that right, but anyway. And then Pate, he and Ginger had some kids and so forth, but they were just a cornerstone of our community, and if you needed anything, those are the people you went to see.
Well, when
we didn't have a welfare system, we didn't have all this.
Right.
You know, so there are people that needed help every now and then. They did.
Well, when Pate passed away, they had some wonderful artifacts from the Snively company, where they had the actual printing plates for some of the labels. The Cypress Gardens label was one of them.
Yeah.
And just some things I hadn't seen before, because they used to have a vending machine for citrus juice back then.
Oh, yeah.
That he had. So I don't know if you knew any of that information or.
Yes.
I don't remember. I mean, I didn't know any of that.
My dad told him that vending machine was whole oranges.
Right.
Yeah. And they were going to squeeze them.
Yes.
Yeah. Said it didn't going to work. And the reason it didn't going to work is not because it's mechanical, but it's never going to pass anybody's safety standard. And they put a lot of money into those machines, and
they did.
They all revolved back to Eagle Lake and storage for years, and they were finally scrapped, I think. But finally, we've got a machine today that even Sam's uses one of them that passes everybody's safety standards. But I think some of the predecessors had a hard time, Food Machinery, with their machine in some places because it wasn't pasteurized.
Right.
We didn't have enough background and knowledge of shelf life and how to test to make sure that field test that we didn't have any E. coli in the juice that we were squeezing it and so forth. Right. Everything was done sanitarily. But anyway, yes, it was a long time coming, a machine that would squeeze juice in the grocery store or a vending machine, but it's finally here. So
when you were growing up, whenever we had a big freeze, we started talking a little bit about firing the groves. Tell us how that worked, and because they don't do that anymore. So tell us a little bit about how that worked.
Well, Phil Herndon was telling me that way back there when he was a kid, and he heard stories that they had properties that were cleaning. So every time they ran outside of something to do, the labor crews would go out into the groves and pick up pine lighter knots. Pine stumps.
Right.
Pine stuff that was this pitchy stuff and they'd pile it
the
beside
sap from the trees,
beside the grove. And so they used that originally, and then to fire the groves, and then it was rubber tires. And what we learned was that there was an inversion, and if you could get enough smoke or fog up to hit that inversion, that temperature inversion, that it would hold it there.
Oh, okay.
So if it wasn't blowing, it was a calm night, frost was forming early in the morning, we could light these fires off. And later on, they were using smudge spots, Shuey, out of California had 2 or 3 different varieties, but their return stack didn't throw up so much smoke as it did heat. For one or the other one, the lazy flame would throw up a whole bunch of smoke too. So there was a trade-off there. But okay, I said something about the pine, and then tires, and then fuel oil. But what happened was that these pine lighter piles, pitch piles, whatever you want to call it, stayed by the grove for years.
Right.
And I'm now living in Lake County, but there were some kids that Mr. Bradshaw had a little airport out there on 27, and beside it there was 10 acres of pine knots stacked up.
10
about
acres?
10 acres, about head high. And he egregiously protected the things. He had a fence around it and all. And some kids got in there one night and lit it off, and the fire department.
Oh my Lord!
It was a big fire. Fire department got in there; they couldn't pump enough water to cool it.
Oh no!
It just roared. I was nowhere around. It's way south of Claremont, but a lot of it got picked up by locals and taken home to use as fire starters in their fireplaces and all that other stuff. But it would clog up the discs. They were pulling it to discs,
okay.
And low motor machines later on. It was hard as steel, tough on the machine. We had to get it out of it.
Wow.
So anyway.
Okay.
And some of it was sold later on, or the big stumps were sold originally with the grove to make to Hercules powder that made gunpowder out of the
from the stumps.
Some of the stumps from the cellulose fiber, nitro cellulose came from stumps. And up out of, a lot of it was delivered to Jacksonville. And I can remember as a kid going over a bridge and seeing acres and acres. And they had to let it age for a while before it was right to be ground up.
Into the gunpowder, okay.
Hercules had a big powder plant, or they ground it up there. It was done a Hercules brand, I guess, wherever they made gunpowder to the out west, I imagine. But anyway.
I had no idea. That's interesting.
yeah. There was Consolidated Naval Stores that owned a lot of property in Central and South Florida that Consolidated Naval Stores.
Naval stores.
They took some of that stuff and they burn it. They put it in a cauldron-like hole in the ground.
Okay.
That the laborers would build it up and they'd burn it, and when it got real hot, then all the guys would throw dirt on it, put it out, and then they would breach that bottom of that thing. And this liquid would come out and run into the sand. And that was naval stores. It was a carbonized, half-cooked, the turpentine was cooked out of half-cooked stuff that was used in ships. So I was in a few years ago in Bangor, Maine. There was a little pile there, and I looked at it, I stepped up on it, and the lady was telling us all these stories. You standing on that pile, do you know what you're standing on? I said, yeah, naval store. And she looked at me, she said, you're the only one that's ever realized
that ever knew what it was.
I came from Florida. But it was a kind of you could heat it just a little bit, it was soft, and they put it in the cracks of the ships to make them waterproof. So when the ships moved and the boards moved in the ships, the old sailing ships, it didn't leak too bad. If it did, you went and pounded it back in.
That's really interesting. Oh my gosh.
Oh well, but that paid for a lot of the land if it was worth 10 cents an acre.
Right.
Yeah.
The land's a lot more than that now.
Yeah. I met with Maxie. Mr. Maxie is a Boy Scout. I was 14 years of age. I had to go talk to a successful businessman, and he was a very interesting character. And he said, he bought part of that military base from the Kissimmee River. He says, my dream someday is to own all the property all the way from Frostproof to there. That never happened, but it came close. But anyway, that was, there was a lot of pine stumps there. There was 3 and 4. I dug some up in one of our groves because our equipment was hitting them.
Right.
I had no idea. Some of them were 12 and 14 foot deep in the ground.
The root ball was?
The whole great big long skinny, it wasn't skinny, they were great big things.
Wow.
And if I'd have known about it, I'd have tried to see if there was a Hercules powder somewhere, and we piled them up and burned them all. They were good. That was a good fire.
I bet.
Yeah. Anyway.
Okay.
More than you wanted to know.
No, I thought that was interesting. I'm keeping you from lunch, I think.
No,
so.
that's all right.
In terms of your family history, are you the only one that actually went into citrus?
No, well, of course, my dad was
A doctor.
Yeah, well, my grandpa was a doctor.
Grandpa.
My dad was a chemist, and he did all the research in citrus, and he did 33
And he's
years.
in the Citrus Hall of Fame.
Yes, he did 33 years with the Department of Agriculture and so
Okay.
forth. So again, when I grew up, you know, I could see the successful people, and who doesn't want to be a successful person?
Right.
You know, so you look to them to see, you know, it was cows, it was timber, it was citrus.
And who did you work for?
Oh, I don't know. One summer, Gene Paul and I went to the Peace River Ranch down there. We hoed orange trees down there.
How old were you?
15, 16. We drove down there, so we had to be about 16 or a little less. I don't remember exactly. And we stayed in a hunting camp and hoed orange trees, and every 2 weeks we'd come home. That was more of a game for us. We were able to. That was before Roundup too. We were able to kill some weeds. You carried a file in your pocket and a grubbing hoe, and that was, anyway, it was work. Anyway.
But then after that, I know you worked for Lake Region, but did you work for anybody before Lake Region?
Oh yes, oh yeah. I wandered around and tried to figure out something I liked to do, and I realized I wanted to be outside and not inside. I went to college in nuclear chemistry and so forth, and I realized then you'd have to live in a cave, because if you did anything, you couldn't tell them what you were doing. I just didn't want that sort of stuff. But anyway, so I went up to University of Florida, went through the citrus program up there, and I got a degree in agriculture there. But anyway, I've worked with a number of people and worked in manufacturing and worked in this and that. But my direction was to, after I got out of college, to get in citrus. There was sort of a recession going on, so I took what job I could. Lake Region was looking for somebody to run their picking department, their harvesting department. They were having trouble getting a fruit pick, and I made some changes and this and that. And we got it picked. You know,
okay.
We got it picked, and nobody else got it picked. Anyway, we got it done.
But Lake Region was. How old were you when you went to work for them?
28.
And then, are you still technically employed with them, or is that done?
It's done. It's done. They were formed for sure in 1909, but we think that something special in 1909 happened. A lot of things special, but I think IRS came to existence. But anyway, there were a lot of people that the first records were 1909, but I think it was 1904. But anyway, so we started for sure in 1909. We're incorporated that year. And one of the things they did in 1909 was join all the railroads in the state of Florida. They'd been warned prior to that we were going to have to go to a standard grade distance between the tracks. Okay. And so all the railroads were joined together in the state of Florida, and that ended a lot of boat shipments. So a lot of boats were parked. Ships.
The steamships, you mean?
Steamships.
Okay.
Passenger carrying boats. I remember one being down there at Sanibel to the left where the ferry used to pick us up. Okay. And there were people living in the thing. They were sitting there cockeyed, but
a little worried when you got on, were you?
I was about to, but it was a big change in Florida when the railroads came together. Citrus was being hauled in that way. You could send it all the way up north. And, you put it in ice bunker rail cars. You know, it was a big change. A lot of things happened.
Well, tell us a little bit about that, just real quickly, if you don't mind. The ice bunker. A lot of people aren't familiar with that, but I know they would ice them down at each spot, or what?
Yeah, there was a car. You'd load it with watermelons or citrus, and we were loading it in a wooden box like this so that it could get wet with ice water. Okay. So the rail cars were made out of wood. The flooring was wood, everything was wood, and on the front of the things there was this thing about 8 foot wide and the whole width of the front of the car, and that was called an ice bunker, and they put ice in that bunker.
What was that made of? Was that also wood, or was that something else?
That was also wood, and as the train moved, there were vents that kept the car from getting terribly hot. Later on, they just converted those bunkers and put a Detroit diesel in there and a refrigeration unit. So then we had the Growers Express. He painted them a little different. They're still, the older cars are still running, you know. And they had, we'd head north. And one of the neat things that I found was that they had something called rollers. Our sales department had some people old enough in there to remember rollers. Rollers were cars that were loaded with boxes of citrus, whether it was tangerines for Christmas or something, or, you know, and they were rolled unsold. So they didn't know where the cars were going to go. So there were 2 or 3 stops on the way that they could divert the cars to New York or Philadelphia or Chicago. So they wanted to get them under refrigeration and get them moving, so they could find somebody who was
who would buy them,
who was short and needed some. He didn't quite get what he wanted. He turned down some fruit or so. So we had rollers coming that direction. They were called unsold fruit.
That's interesting. I never knew that. Absolutely. So, okay. When they put the ice, did they have to put the ice in several different stops, or did it?
I would presume so, if they were going to be on the rail for a while. If they had the railroads worked differently then.
Right.
They didn't have big sidings where they stopped them for days and weeks and what have you for varying reasons. But all of them work together better, I guess. I don't.
Okay. Well, one of the things I also had asked about was, somebody had said that the railroads help build or help pay for some of the packing houses. Is that true?
Yes. There's a couple of novels out. This Land I Take, and there's another one anyway. But they described that the government set up a deal where the railroads could come through and lay their tracks, and the government would give them a section on each side of the tracks. Okay. And when they made a cross or something where 2 or 3 different railroads came together, that became a town. And then they would build, they in that section of timber that they got off of a section, they would cut the timber and cut it in what was known as rail stock, or just stock. And the stock was 6 inches thick and 12 inches wide. Okay. So they could use it for rail ties, or they could take it in their sawmills and cut lumber off the side of it. So they weren't hauling all the big logs, but it was just the stock that you make lumber out of. So they would make storage buildings for a fertilizer or something, so they could drop fertilizer off. So the growers of tomatoes or watermelons or green beans or whatever it was, citrus, had a place for that, and had a place for a packing house, and they'd help build you a packing house. There was enough citrus in the area, so the railroads really kept modernizing our business. We went from steamships to rails and all that sort of stuff back in, when still a lot of things were done by hand. And prior to 1909, it was a little different world we have today. Totally different.
In terms of do you know any of the packing houses by name that were built by the railroad?
Well, I know one of the buildings that we had was during the Second World War. It was down the railroad tracks away, and you could go underneath. When we were searching for citrus labels, you could go in the packing house. You could tell those that had that rail stock. The great big pieces of beam that ran up and around. Okay. They had plenty of it, so they made the packing house. But there was a building down from Lake Region about 400 yards that Mr. Pravat wanted, and he was in charge of the labor board or the draft board, and he knew where all the labor was. And so what they did that summer was to jack up that building. It was only a single story, and take big pine trees and rolled it down the railroad track. When they got down to where we were, he rolled it off, but then he jacked it up and rolled it and jacked it up and rolled it and set it in, and then he built another packing house underneath it. Was his goal. He had taken a piece of property, about 40 acres, and cut the pine off of it. Says, I'll cut the pine, keep the pine, plant you a grove on this property, and you'll be a member of Lake Region Packing. You had to do all kinds of things to, So when he got he set the timber up to dry, and the old way they did it, they stacked it and sections stacked like that. Anyway. Okay. And then he brought it into town, I guess he built it, I don't know, brought it into town to use it to build his packing house, the part that was underneath.
Okay.
And the government came to us and said, no, 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 can't do that. All new cut lumber goes to war effort.
Whoa. So you did
So
all that for nothing?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. But across over in Deltona and the other side of Mount Dora, there was a Seminole groves over there, and there was an old commissary over there. So he bought the commissary. It was a great big old thing. It had been used as a music hall or juke joint, they used to call it. And he tore it down, and that's the lumber he used to finish up all this doings, because he had plenty of labor. If you were working, you weren't going to get drafted. If you were working in agriculture particularly, and it was a war effort, you know. So
they wanted to be working.
so they wanted to be working, so plenty of labor. So, but that one was obviously, looking at it from the bottom side, jacked up on the lower floor. You know, it was there until we tore the building down. But anyway, it was added on to, and you did what you had to make things work. You know.
So what did you do with all the lumber when you tore it down?
We gave some of it to the city. They were going to build a building out of it, and most of it just went away with the big crusher, you know. But the city had it all stacked up. They were going to build a building out of it and all that. Some kid got out there and set it afire one night.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It was lap straight. A lot of the building was. That's a 2x6. It was cut with a big old tongue and groove sort of like thing.
Okay.
And the two pieces of wood would slide together. And it went on the deck of shipping. It went on the flooring of a rail car, and as that car went down, that stuff would shift in that joint, and you know, would never come unhinged, or things would, nothing much would go up. It was all lap straight lumber. Yeah. Anyway.
It's a shame it got burned up.
Yeah. Well.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I've kept you here long enough, but is there anything you want to say before we leave?
No. It's been a good ride. That's all I can say. It really has. Yeah. It's been fun.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate that.
All right.
We'll have to do another one soon.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, John.
Bye.